Story number 1. I thought the quiet room would keep us safe. I was wrong about the kind of silence that room could hold. The first thing to enter was a rule none of us had learned: stay invisible. The second was a stranger who understood fear better than we did. By the time I stood up, nothing in that lab felt like school anymore. Our computer lab lived at the far end of a long hallway, a room nobody visited unless they meant to. The floor held the clean smell of plastic and dusted keyboards. Monitors faced the door like glass eyes, their glow steady and indifferent. I liked that room because attention flowed in one direction, into the screen, and life outside slowed. Independence felt ordinary there. We typed, we built, we debugged, and nobody hovered. The man in charge coached players in a different room, and he let our island of machines run itself while he drew plays in chalk and breathed strategy. That suited us. The lab thrived on the quiet permission to be competent. I took the back station near a tangle of Ethernet cables and a low cabinet that hummed with patient power. The others filled the row beside me, silhouettes against the glow. We did not trade jokes or fill the air with small talk. We did not need to. Competence has a language, scrolling code, the controlled clatter of keys, the soft quiet that follows a problem solved. The hallway outside was long enough to erase footsteps before they arrived. When the door clicked, the lab felt sealed, as if the building forgot we existed for a while. And that felt like a gift. Our teacher practiced a kind of distance that felt like trust. Never neglect. He set a direction, gave a small nod, and let the room breathe. The pattern held, screens lit, task lists open, music low from the lab speakers, a rhythm that turned effort into calm. I had a script open and a shy little bug to track. The kind that hides until only one set of eyes is watching. I liked bugs like that. They made me feel capable, like the world could still be solved by patience and a bit of logic. It was not a very popular class and only had 5 students in it total. Smallness shaped us into a quiet ecosystem. Fewer voices meant gentler mistakes. The lab sat so far down the corridor that the usual noise of school life arrived muffled, like talk through a wall. We kept the place running ourselves, wiped monitors, traded a mouse with a sticky button, left a note on the whiteboard when a station needed attention. The room felt like an island of reasonable choices, a place where common sense was the default setting and no one had to announce it. We were all pretty good students, so he gave us a lot of independence. I tell you all this because I want you to see the room the way I did. Not as a hiding place, but as a place that didn't need to hide anything. That's why the first change didn't look like danger. It arrived as a rule from somewhere above us. Not a face, not a voice we knew, just a sentence that pressed itself against every wall and screen at once. It said that the school was being locked down, and for teachers to follow the lockdown procedures, the speakers flattened the air. The message took the desk under my hands and made it foreign. In the lab, we knew how to tame printers and unfreeze windows. We did not know what to do with a command that turned the hallway into a question. We glanced at the door. We glanced at each other. The room kept breathing, but I felt it slow, as if the machines were thinking through a problem I could not read. I waited for steps I recognized and told myself nothing had changed. Not really. As if a sentence could be ignored by choosing a different line of code. Then we heard footsteps in the hallway. They did not rush. They sounded measured, like someone claiming squares of floor tile with deliberate intent. I kept my eyes on my code, then on the reflection in my monitor, where the doorway hovered as a dark rectangle behind floating lines of text. I thought about standing. I thought about telling someone else to do it. Instead, I sat very still and listened to my breath and the steady murmur of power from the cabinet by my knee. We were all sitting at the back side of the classroom behind computers and facing the front. What we saw was a man entered the room who was not our teacher. He belonged to the hallway, not to us. That was my first thought. The way certain people carry the outside with them even after they step in. It rode his shoulders like rain that couldn't find a roof. The jacket hung heavy. His hair framed his face in ragged strings, lines drawn with a dull pencil. He did not introduce himself. He did not ask. He stepped into our permission and tried to take its shape.
Nobody say a word. The way he said it was really threatening. I was honestly pretty scared.
Fear doesn't always sprint. Sometimes it sits beside you and puts a hand on your shoulder. It pressed down, firm and cold. My cursor blinked as if waiting for instruction. The stranger's eyes moved over us like a scanner. He was counting something, exits, witnesses, or maybe the number of ways silence could fail him. We all nodded our heads, not knowing what the guy was capable of. Then he walked over to the door and looked out of the window into the hallway. He used the window the way swimmers use air. Each glance sustained him. He paced between the threshold and the first row, a human pendulum searching for its clock. I tried to shrink without moving. My hands slid from the keyboard to my lap, palms open, as if the room had suddenly turned sacred, and I needed to show I carried nothing worth taking. We all just sat there, frozen in fear pretty much. The monitors became shields that hid nothing. The map of the lab, rows of stations, cords like roots. A whiteboard littered with notes about ports and shortcuts looked ridiculous under the weight of a man whose needs did not include software. He kept lifting his gaze to the rectangle of glass. Watching some theater we could not see, I wondered who else occupied the hall. I wondered if we were already seen, already counted, already assigned a number I didn't want to know. Then the man went to the door, opened it, and ran out. The doorway swallowed him. Sound returned in fragments, the small movements we had been afraid to make. A chair rolled. Someone finally breathed. I noticed my shoulders were still near my ears. I lowered them and felt the room rush back, wobbly and bright, like breaking the surface after staying under too long. We didn't cheer. We didn't speak. We moved with the caution of people who know relief can still be broken. We reported the guy knowing that he was more than likely the cause for the school lockdown. We were told that the police were there already and inside of the school searching for him. Information arrived like a key slid under the door. It didn't open anything, but it meant someone knew which room to find. We stayed low behind our stations. I remember the smell of a warm monitor, the faint singe of dust on metal, and the math of decisions I kept doing in my head, the kind you can't check with a compiler. Should I move closer to the door, farther from it, nearer to the cabinets that might block a line of sight? The lab I loved offered no answers, only surfaces. The hallway returned to being a hallway, but I didn't trust it. The stranger had left a shape behind like a wet footprint. It spread across our screens and pooled in the corners. We didn't collect our bags or close our files. We waited inside the kind of caution that turns a single corridor into a country. I promised myself I would never again confuse quiet with safety. The man was caught and arrested after trying to escape the school. When I finally stood, my legs trembled as if a long charge had drained through them. Our teacher stepped back into the lab with a face I had never seen him wear, the look of someone pulled between two jobs that never asked to meet. He studied the locked door, then us, then the places we had chosen to hide and not hide. He told us what he could and left the rest in the air. And the room kept all of it the way rooms do, without applause. Later, the story moved through the building like a rumor that had earned the right to be true. People assigned motives, people assigned warnings, the place adjusted its bones. The lab got a new lock, a bright strip of tape along the threshold, a checklist by the light switch that nobody could ignore. I kept coding there, but I never again sat with my back to the door. The rectangle of glass stopped being part of the wall. It became another screen that needed watching. Thankfully, nobody was harmed, though survival teaches in a language no syllabus can cover. I learned how far authority can feel, how easy it is to wait for help instead of making one small, brave choice. How a room can be both sanctuary and stage, and I still think about the stranger. How he lifted the silence and wore it like a coat. I don't know what he would have done if we had disobeyed him. I don't know what would have happened if he had stayed, and I only know that fear often looks like obedience. And I carry that lesson into every room with a door and a window. The lab is probably different now, hardware upgraded, posters changed, new projects flickering to life, but there will always be a door at the end of a long hallway. And there will always be someone who believes the quiet behind it belongs to them. I used to think the safest place in school was the one nobody remembered. Now I believe the safest place is the one where everyone knows exactly what to do, even when the plan does not arrive in time. Story number 2. I thought I knew every echo in that building until one of them started following me. Empty hallways aren't quiet. They think. When the ceiling opened, the school felt like a different species, hollow, breathing, awake above me. I learned the worst kind of secret isn't whispered, it watches. If you ever feel alone in a place built for thousands, check the space between the tiles out. Josh and I walked together to our lockers, which were down in the commons area on the first floor. The smell of floor cleaner still hung in the air. That lemon-bright scent the custodians favored, turning every step into something antiseptic and cheerful. We drifted like we owned the place, 2 bodies taking up more space than we needed, joking about nothing, letting our backpacks thump our shoulders. The hallways were already pretty quiet during this time, quiet in the way of a stage with the curtain just down, the scene set, the audience gone, the props still believing they matter. As we walked down the stairs, we were talking to each other and taking our time. We traded rumors, compared teachers, made plans that would never happen. Listen, that it didn't really matter if we were late to study hall because it wasn't a real class. You could coast in that room and no one would push back. You would just sit there and do homework or go on your phone the whole time. And the teachers didn't really do anything. It was a room that taught you how to vanish with permission. We spun combination locks, door metal rattling lightly as if the tangle of notebooks and gym shoes inside were trying to breathe. So, when we got to our lockers, there weren't really any other students around. The bulletin boards stared with last week flyers, a lost and found box slouched open like a mouthful of forgotten scarves. We were still talking and we heard a sound come over the school intercom that was not just the typical bell sound, it was flatter. A voice pressed through a wire screen. However, I didn't really hear it, not the words. I heard the mood of it. The way air can tilt and tell you trouble without giving you the headline. I didn't catch it, and I asked Josh what the announcement was. He shrugged, already turning away, already becoming someone else again. The version of him that existed on the far wing where I never went, and he said it was a lockdown drill. So we continued talking. He gave me a look that said, "This is nothing, this is 5 minutes of pretend." And then he left with the grace of someone who didn't mind doors closing behind him, and I stood there with the whisper of vents and the patience of clock hands. After hearing there was a lockdown drill, I didn't really want to go to my classroom right away. It felt wrong to walk into a room mid-ritual, to join a performance already underway. I figured that it would be weird to walk in during a lockdown drill, so I would just stay in the hallways until it was over. The school always told us we were safest behind a locked door, but I had never been good at believing announcements. The drills usually only lasted like 5 minutes anyways. What could happen in 5 minutes? A secret could choose a body. A building could inhale. My teacher would figure out that I just went to another room for the drill. Probably. That was the alibi I handed myself as I closed my locker and let the soft clang settle. My shoes met tile, tile met shadow, and the first corridor opened long and straight as a river through corn. The posters along the walls smiled in printed color. The glass trophy case told its stale legends. Exit signs made promises in green. So, I started to walk slowly down the hallways, taking my time. I let my hand glide the paint-chipped rail of a stairwell landing, traced the seam where baseboard met tile, counted the grey flecks in the floor. It was now completely empty and also silent. Silence is never empty, though it is full of weight. It sits on your shoulder and tests whether your bones can carry it. As I slowly walked down a nearby hallway, I heard footsteps a ways behind me approaching. Not loud, measured, the sort of rhythm that tells you the walker knows exactly where they're going. I had been drifting, and now my drifting had acquired a destination, a way. So I moved down the hallway and then turned to the left. My breath thinned into something useful. I took in the geometry, the long run of lockers, the glass pane of a science room, the power outlet scuffed by 1,000 phone chargers. I started quietly walking down this hallway, which was very long. The red exit sign at the far end watched like a small, distant planet.
I hoped that the footsteps would move away. Hope has a sound, and it is fragile. Unfortunately, they didn't. They matched, not pounding, just insisting. I heard the footsteps continuing to get close to me, the kind of approach that says, "You've been chosen by a map you don't see." I started walking down the hallway as quickly as I could, not running. Running says you agree with the fear. Walking fast says you're trying to change the terms.
As the footsteps approached the corner, but there was really nowhere to go, so I decided to quickly find a place to hide. The lockers stood in ranks. Metal soldiers with vents for lungs went in between a row of lockers out of desperation. Hinges kissed my backpack. Paint bit my elbow. I was out of the person's sight for now. But when they got even with me in the hallway, they would be able to see me. The corridor hummed with lights that pretended to be stars. My heart was racing, and I didn't know what was going on. The only thing I knew was that people who belong in a place make a particular noise. This noise didn't belong. I told myself to be the building. If I could hold still enough, I could become drywall and tile and dull beige, be flat, be anonymous, be a locked door without a room behind it. The footsteps got into the hallway, and I was sure that it was a hall monitor or a teacher, and that I would be in trouble. The thought arrived so neatly that I almost believed it. I decided to look and see who it was. I tilted, barely, made a human keyhole of my fear. But when I did, it was not who I expected. The sight rewrote the corridor, edited out the air. I saw that there was a man walking down the hallway that I did not recognize. Staff lanyard. Not a student face. He wasn't a teacher or anything like that, and certainly not a student. He moved like gravity took orders from him. It was some guy just wearing a sweatshirt and jeans. The kind of outfit meant to be forgettable. A costume for blending in when blending in is the point. He was walking down the hallway and in my direction, but didn't seem like he knew that I was there. I measured the distance the way you measure lightning, without counting. As he got closer and closer, I was starting to wonder what was going on. My mind briefly offered the most generous story. Some dad lost on the way to the office. A delivery guy hunting a signature. Maybe it wasn't a lockdown drill after all, but an actual lockdown. The generous story crumbled before it finished.
That was when the ceiling learned my name.
The man got within probably 50 feet of me, not close enough to touch the shape I made, close enough to move the air that held me. Then he stopped right in front of several lockers. He looked up, chin angling to the grid above us, as if checking weather that only a few people know how to read. What he did next was very unexpected. He did not knock, did not test a door. He climbed. The man climbed on top of the lockers, now standing where he had to crouch to not hit his head on the ceiling. Shoes found the thin strip of metal like it had been measured for this purpose. He proceeded to remove one of the ceiling tiles, and then crawled up into it. Going into the ceiling, it was practiced, the way his hands knew where to push, the way the tile agreed to step aside. I couldn't believe what I had seen. Belief wasn't the point, being quiet was. The void above swallowed him, and the panel settled back as if nothing human had passed.
I unspooled from my hiding slot, letting the building give me back my shape. My legs leaned forward again, so I did not run. I threaded the corridor like a needle with a single task, pulling shut a wound. A classroom door ahead glowed with the promise of people and rules and an adult who would stand between my head and the dark spaces of the school. I reached it and rapped 3 quick times, not loud, just coded. The teacher's face appeared, pupils narrowing at the break in routine, and the lock turned. "I need you to hear this," I said. Voice kept to a slice. "There's someone in the ceiling."
His jaw moved once, like he had to swallow the sentence to make sense of it. The door opened wider, and the room accepted me as a survivor, accepts a shoreline. Chairs scraped. No, not scraped. I won't give you that word. I won't give sound the power. And bodies drew tighter, like the class could knit itself into a shield. If we believed, the teacher reached for the phone, speaking low, each word a switch, flipping somewhere else in the building. Policy became pulse. Time became a hallway too, long, lit, monitored, and the protocol wrapped itself around the school, sealing seams, giving us that necessary performance of safety. Students hid behind cabinets and under tables, blinds fell, the door clicked. No one joked. Air browsed our skin and found no purchase. My sight landed on the suspended ceiling grid. Every square was a question.
Eventually, they found the man. None of us saw the capture. We only heard that somewhere a panel lifted and hands met hands in a way that decided the rest of the day. He was a guy who had been living in the school for several days. That was the sentence that made the building flinch. He was able to move around in the ceilings and in back hallways. He knew the spine of our school, the roots the rest of us forgot existed. The school was kind of old and outdated and had a decent amount of places he could hide. Age is a kindness until it isn't.
I walked those halls after, ever again, differently. The vents whispered a new alphabet. The tiles looked heavier. Adults fixed panels and replaced locks. And the official story learned how to stand on its hind legs without trembling. But my version never hardened. It kept the soft center. The knowledge that a person can live so near you that your day stands on their roof and never notices. I thought a lot about the choices that make a man decide to climb out of his ordinary life and live above ours. Did he eat vending machine dinners and count the red dots of exit signs in the dark like constellations? Did he listen to our small talk through the ductwork and feel richer or poorer for it? Did the school feel like sanctuary or hunting ground to him? There are answers I could have asked for. Later, when adults spoke to adults in offices, but I didn't. Instead, I went quiet in new ways. The world rewards that quiet. It calls it maturity. I call it learning to hear the wrong kind of footsteps early enough that you can choose a different hallway. At night, I sometimes pictured the lockers as a ladder to a thin country where dust is weather. And I remembered how easy it was for him to lift a tile like a magician lifting a coin. The trick is never the coin, it is teaching your audience where not to look. We had not looked up. We had never learned to. Schools, train your eyes forward. Board, teacher, clock, door. They never tell you the ceiling is just another door. When people asked later, friends who loved the taste of almost danger, "Were you scared?" I learned to answer with a shrug that meant I stayed very still and watched the building open its mouth. Fear demands a story. I have only a posture. If I hold still enough, I go unseen. If I go unseen, I go unhurt. It is not heroism. It is a way to be a shadow that survives until the light changes. We got a new announcement the week after. The message was ordinary. Schedule, reminder, the bureaucratic heartbeat of school. But I listened all the way to the last word, said nothing. I stared at the drop ceiling and counted the squares on. I finally knew how many. I guess it was really creepy. Creepy isn't the right size for it, but it will do when language doesn't want to admit the truth. Some buildings are bigger inside than their blueprints, and some of that space is made of people you were never introduced to. Some doors are square and white and rest above your head. We forget to lock those. If a place has a heartbeat, someone can learn its rhythm. Security is often a performance. The ceiling does not clap. I don't believe in empty anymore. I believe in out of sight. If you think the story ends when the panel closes, listen again. Story number 3. A stranger with a badge told me to keep walking, and every signal in my body pushed against the order. Every door looked compliant until my hand met it, and then the building answered with stillness. The intercom chewed a message into static, leaving me to choose between the noise and my own legs, while she steered me toward an unused side door, the daylight outside too polished, like a stage waiting for its one actor. I followed until patrol lights tinted the road, and that's when her eyes began plotting the angles that cameras miss. The day did its usual imitation of calm, lockers shut, shoes crossing paths, the long spine of corridor carrying everyone forward, until it didn't. I moved alone in a thinning river of students, sure of my route, counting breaths like stepping stones. A tone rolled across the ceiling, a practiced chime that meant move faster. The hallway inhaled emptiness, and yet nothing in me worried. I knew the map of this place by muscle, not by thought. Then a second sound came too soon, not where it belonged. The warning bell cut into the first bell's echo, and the air changed temperature the way a room does when someone you didn't notice walks in. An announcement followed, vowels swallowed by an old speaker that made language sound chewed. I caught only the shape of sentences and the pace of somebody trying to project control. I kept going, because momentum can look like confidence. The farther I walked, the more the building revealed how quickly it could become a deserted city. Classroom after classroom swallowed whoever belonged to it, and the corridor turned into a memory of motion. I reached my room and met a door that refused me. The handle delivered nothing. Locked. The paint was cool against my knuckles, as if the building had skin. I tried not to picture reasons. I told myself the system was overreacting to weather, or a drill. I told myself adults would appear like punctuation and correct the sentence of the moment. Instead, a voice traveled from far down the corridor, a single question asking why I was here. I turned and saw a woman who carried herself like a person used to being obeyed. She didn't wear a uniform, but authority has a posture. She lifted her chin by a few degrees and indicated that I should come closer. Her voice held the word lockdown like it belonged to her. The moment she said it, the silence around us made sense. I approached, grateful for direction, and she pivoted with assurance, choosing a route no one else had taken. We moved past familiar doors, then turned right into a lesser artery, where the fluorescent light went a little green and the floor kept secrets. At the end waited an exit with paint healthier than the others. The kind of door that looks helpful while it hides a choice. My steps hesitated. Why out, not in? The question brushed my ankle like a draft. Still, I followed. Outside, the day looked staged. Air carried the smell of cut weeds and warming tar. A delivery truck idled somewhere out of sight. This was the side of the building that faces nobody, all blunt angles and utility boxes. To the east, beyond the service lane, the road ran quiet. She rotated on one heel as if the ground had made a suggestion and placed her hand on my arm. The contact wasn't rough, it was efficient. "This way," she said, aiming us behind the school, toward a narrow, grassy strip where brick gives way to chain link and then to houses. Her face didn't register me, it registered the path. The calm in her expression felt colder than fear. "Trust the quiet part of you," something inside me said. It didn't feel like panic. It felt like discovering a key in a coat you didn't know had pockets. I let her guide the path until the building's windows couldn't see us. That was where I stopped being a compliant shape. I slowed, widened the space between our hands, then widened it more, and then turned my body entirely. She called my name as if testing whether it belonged to me. I did not study her expression. I ran. The door we had used stared back without interest. My palm met resistance. Locked again, I rounded the corner and headed for the front, where pavement opened like a harbor. There, blue and white cars formed a small fleet. An officer extended a hand and a question. I gave him the short version. Stranger. Side exit. Change of course when the police appeared. He placed me in the quiet behind the cars and spoke into a radio that turned the situation into verbs. From the curb, the building looked like a held breath, but more cars arrived. Doors opened, radios murmured, and yet the space around me felt padded, as if someone had placed a glass case over this patch of asphalt. I watched the officer, who had parked closest to the front step, sideways, to keep me in sight while still watching the exit. His presence didn't erase my fear. It gave it better edges. You are not invisible, I told myself. You are not alone. From that distance, the building looked like a patient in a gown. Every opening tightened. Only necessary functions visible. Officers moved in a choreography I couldn't decipher. A new car arrived and settled with the smoothness of a decision already made. The air smelled like rain that had changed its mind. My hands steadied now that my feet had stopped. In stillness, I could count the beats rising through my throat and settling behind my ears. The announcement returned, clearer in the open air, as if the sky handled sound better than ceiling tiles, and someone directed classes to stay put and wait. The speaker voice named wings and halls, letters that mapped a world I suddenly understood from the outside. I kept my place on the curb like a bookmark. The officer nearest to me kept me in his periphery and nodded sometimes. A small anchor tossed my way so I wouldn't drift. I told him what I could. A woman I didn't know, a path no teacher would choose, a controlled tone that avoided the eyes, the unneeded exit. The moment she saw the police car and pivoted toward the blind side of the grounds, his jaw tightened by a degree most people wouldn't notice. You did fine, he said, and it landed like an oath. He asked me not to go anywhere. I wanted to promise I would never move again. Minutes folded and unfolded. I tried to imagine the classrooms I couldn't reach, backpacks under desks, phones tucked away, everyone measuring breaths and listening for meaning inside quiet. I pictured my own empty seat, the one that held the shape of my shoulder blades and kept the memory of my pencil marks. I am not there, and someone is counting me absent. I thought, the idea felt like standing beside your own outline. A radio confirmed what my skin already knew. The lockdown wasn't a drill. It was about her. She belonged to no staff list. A name had to be hunted in records no one kept. She had been seen in multiple corridors with a posture that borrowed authority and a gaze that avoided lenses. We have eyes on a person of interest, a voice said, careful and clipped. And then another voice said, where behind the school, near the grassy strip that runs away from sightlines and into neighborhood shadows. My pulse answered like a witness. That was our route. That was the angle she had wanted. The officer looked at me once and then back to his work, as if the look itself had to be rationed while things were moving. I realized I was shaking only when he stepped closer and shared the rectangle of shade cast by his shoulders. You're okay, he said. He didn't use a soothing tone. He used a factual one, the kind you can stack other truths on top of. They found her where the chain link thins near a service gate. She was not running. She walked with the patience of someone rehearsing an alibi. When they approached, She smiled the way people do when they want questions to evaporate. She talked about looking for a niece. She gestured toward the east, then changed her mind and gestured toward the front. It didn't matter. The story never latched onto anything solid. When they asked for the name of the teacher, she claimed to know. She offered a last name that didn't belong to our campus. I thought about the moment her hand closed around my arm, how ordinary it had felt, how efficient, not friendly, not cruel, utilitarian, like a tool reaching for its intended notch. I hated that coolness more than I feared the unknown that could have followed. That coolness meant I could have been anyone and it still would have worked. It meant there was nothing personal for me to undo with apology or rage, only a plan that preferred a small person walking where few people look. The radios decided the rest. Units shifted, cars adjusted, administrators emerged from nearby doors to speak with the police. The announcement finally arrived with language you could trust. All clear for certain wings. Continued hold for others. The speaker voice restored labels to the world. The lockdown unwound like a knot pulled tight enough to remember the shape of strain even after loosening.
When they let me go, the officer walked me to a spot where the light wasn't so bright. And he asked for a statement, and I gave it in the order that made sense inside my head. Not the order it happened outside of me. He didn't mind. He wrote what I said and thanked me for details that would have embarrassed me on any other day. The color of a shoe, the slope of a shoulder, the way the word teacher sounded borrowed, not worn. He made me promise one thing. If any adult ever directed me toward an exit that didn't match the nearest safe room, I was to find another adult or create a crowd with my own voice.